Today I'm on a Zoom call to you're in Sydney or Sydney
I am.
around. Yeah,
Sydney, Australia.
Sydney, Australia with Libby Hopwood. Libby, thanks very much for taking some of your time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a former champion apprentice. You're a jockey with 324 winners, a TV presenter, paid tipster, and we'll talk about the other bits a bit later on. So you're a very, very busy lady. What's your main job these days?
My main job is I actually work on the ground with racehorses. I have a business where I see horses um, and see them with pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, which is why I'm all still in my uniform. I came rushing home and got on this Zoom call with you. So I'm still covered in about 3 foot of horse dust and horse hair. But so I go to all the major racetracks in the city of Sydney. I go there 5 days a week, and then I come home and I do form, and then I do the OnlyFans content as well. So, um, my main job, time wise, possibly the horses, um, running a close second to form, and actually the OnlyFans takes up a lot of that as well. Income wise, I guess it would be the horses over the span of the years that I've been doing it. But it looks like OnlyFans is going to outstrip that.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the only fans bit later on. So I was interested. I've sort of Googled you as you do before these interviews, and I read. Please,
Understood.
I apologize if stuff's wrong because I blame Google. But I read that you grew up on a camel farm, riding horses and racing camels.
Yes, I grew up on a cattle farm, so I grew up with the cows. But my dad had camels of all things, and he used to race them. So every year we'd pack up a big semi trailer full of camels, and we'd go up north around the desert and chase the camel racing circuit. And I'd ride camels for almost 6 months every year. As a kid, pull me out of school. I'd do school by correspondence, so I'd get sent up north in the truck with a sheaf of material like this that I had to keep up with, which I was good. I was a good student, so I kept up with it mostly until the maths. I did struggle with maths. Don't like that.
Now I've been to Australia a few times, and I must admit I had no idea. I've eaten camel, but I didn't realise that they race them. So what's the camel racing scene like? I mean, is there bookies and form and all that sort of thing?
It was. Absolutely. Oh, not necessarily form because the pool of racing camels is very small. So we generally know who the best camels are anyway. But there was definitely bookies on course. It's taken a dive now. The insurances have really destroyed it. But yeah, it was a thriving circuit for a while when there was a handful of trainers with all the same camels. We were lucky enough to get a champion for a few years, and then he fractured a sesamoid in his fetlock, and we retired him, and he just became a riding camel. So survived that. It's not like it was just a fracture, so he was fine, but he wasn't a champion anymore. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. There was one camel that was a champion for years on end. His name was a eunuch, and he was an absolute nut job, which was hilarious.
Did they run on sort of horse racing tracks then? That
Yeah,
how it worked?
yeah.
Right. So when you say you were brought up on a cattle farm, um, I imagine a cattle farm in Australia is slightly bigger than a cattle farm in the UK. So how big a sort of place are we looking at?
No, we were only quite small. I guess we had a bit over 100 acres, and ran. I don't even know how many cows on that, but I think we had like 150 acres spread across two properties. But where we were, so far as the size of farms, we were one of the small guys. There was massive properties out there, and then of course with the camels, when we got up north, we were spending a lot of our time on stations, which are just thousands of kilometers. So we were small fries. We had a few Herefords that we breed and sell every year.
And where did the horse racing come into it? Was there any horse racing?
No, but I grew up riding horses, so I was obviously a farm kid and a country kid. I grew up riding the horses, and my first job, I needed money to go to university, and I saw a job offering for ground staff, and I figured why not? I can handle a horse, so I went in there. Horses were all I knew. I actually got the job because I put on my resume that I could ride camels, and his theory was if I could ride a camel, I could ride a horse, so it should be fine. Um, he was down a track rider one day, so I jumped on board to help him out, and he offered me an apprenticeship. I came out at the end of that with the decision to go to university because this was in my gap year. I could go to university and come out at the end of 4 years with a debt looking for a job, or I could do an apprenticeship and come out with money and a career. So I decided to ride horses.
So you'd already qualified to go to university. That
I was going to study archaeology and forensic sciences.
okay? So is that would still be open to you if you ever wanted to do it again? Or
Uh,
take it up?
I don't know. It's not as of interest to me as it once was, which is interesting because when you're young, you're gung ho and you're going to go to university and this is going to be your career. And I'm 20 years down the track, and I was like, like history and archaeology still deeply fascinates me, but I don't think enough to forge a career in it.
Right. So when you were growing up as a young girl on a cattle farm in the country Australia, I mean, how isolated is it? I mean, is it like one of the we sort of think of Skippy and needing a helicopter to get everywhere and that sort of thing? I mean, are you sort of on your own a lot?
There are drop bears. No, we're not that isolated where I was. We were in a nice little rural community in Victoria, small town, but where we used to go up north of the camels, that was proper isolation. We'd stay on a place called Coward Springs, which was this tiny little, essentially an oasis. So there was a hot spring there, and there's some natural water sources there. And outside of that, it was thousands of kilometers of just gibber flat and desert. So that is as isolated as it comes. Your shopping there is a road train will go through every month or so and drop off a heap of supplies. And if you get injured, as people did do, you need the Royal Flying Doctor in. So I've lived on both ends of the spectrum, country all the way around, but either extremely rural or just on the farm in Victoria.
That was, I mean, your dad having racing camels in Victoria, the logistics were a little bit, wouldn't have been better off moving up to sort of the Northern Territories or something like that? What was that? Why did he sort of do it down there?
Well, the camel racing was all over the place. There was camel racing in South Australia, New South Wales, Northern Territory, and um, what was the other state? Queensland. So they were the main circuits. The Northern Territory, we actually didn't have much in the way of camel racing because they did have it there, but it was more a tourist trap, and the real trainers weren't actually allowed to participate in those races. So it was a bit of a scandal when I was a kid. But where we were on our farm, my dad had that farm forever, and the camel sort of grew out of that. So the cows would be all right. They'd be looked after for 6 months every year. We had a vet friend that lived up the road, and they'd drop in and check the cattle while we were up north with the camels. But we'd go do that when it was cold, which is quite nice. The camels don't like the cold, so we'd load them up, take them up north, get into the sun, and then come back.
Okay, well, tell us a bit more about this when you went into be where you started this working in the yard to begin with, just to get a few quid to pay for your books and stuff. And then you took a chance when somebody needed a rider, the trainer needed a rider. So tell us how quickly things moved on from there.
They progressed pretty quickly because I love riding horses, and I was lucky enough that I picked it up reasonably quickly. So I always had the people that employed me always had confidence in my abilities. So it was never a question of umming and ahhing about whether this is the right decision or not. Worked hard, spent my time down in that country stable with a very, very astute country trainer. He taught me a hell of a lot. And then when I wanted to progress, I moved up to Adelaide, and that started my city riding career.
Okay, what's you say taught you a hell of a lot? What sort of things did he teach you? What
He was an
aspects of the game?
excellent horseman. So he wasn't necessarily a jockey. Well, he was never a jockey, never rode horses like that, but an excellent horseman. He himself used to be a rough rider back in the day. He'd go around a almost similar to the camel racing circuit. So when we were on the camels on the circuit, there was this big top tent that used to travel around, and they'd have boxes in there as the entertainment. And one night of the carnival, the boxers would all get up the top, and it was called Fred Brophy's boxing tent. They'd come out and they'd MC, and they'd get spectators to come in and challenge the boxers, and that was the entertainment for the night. So pretty rough, as you can imagine. But the trainer that I started my apprenticeship with, he used to actually be a Fred Brophy boxer. So he used to travel around that circuit, was a boxer, was an excellent horse rider, excellent trainer, one of the best horsemen I know, but never rode a racehorse as such. And when he did try to teach me how to use the whip, that was hilarious. He was wrong in that instance, but it's not many times he's wrong.
Right, so when you got that opportunity to take over from somebody that can do it, had you been pestering like I can ride and all that sort of thing, or were they surprised that they'd had you for this long and they hadn't got you up on the horse properly?
I know. Yeah, I don't think I was there for very long. I was on the ground. I was competent with horses. I was riding horses around his setup was he had a property that had a big tract of land around it, and then the horses would work around there the majority of their time, and then they'd go into the track twice a week. So I was already riding the horses, so he knew I was a competent rider, but it was just on the track where he offered me the job and decided to give it a go.
Okay, so the next thing I've noted down, you became champion apprentice. So how big a time scale are we talking between that moment and you being the champion apprentice?
It was probably half. So you start your career, you obviously start off slowly and then you build on from there. But I was champion apprentice the last 2 years that I rode as an apprentice. So it was only a 4 year apprenticeship. I outrode my claim, so I came out a little bit early as well. So half or a little bit less than half.
Now, this is probably going to sound a silly question because you were a successful jockey, but how difficult? You often hear about apprentices over here that their flavor of the month, they win everything, and then they find it extremely difficult when they go professional. So how did you find that transition?
It was hard as well. I was hard because I was a boom apprentice and did really, really well. And then I got a little bit caught up, in fact, in winning the Metropolitan Premiership as an apprentice because I hadn't been done before. I was out in front. I got tunnel vision and I got a little bit weird about it. And my boss ended up pulling me off a few horses to sort of get me to pull my head in and teach me a lesson, which frankly, I still think it still hurts me because I only went down by 3 in the end and I would have been the first apprentice to do it. The only one to do it since then has been Jamie Carr. So, um, yeah, I sort of lost my way a little bit on that purely through tunnel vision and wanting to be a champion. And then it slowed down a little bit. Things sort of came off the rails a bit, slowed down. I outrode my claim. So I came out a senior when I didn't really have a great deal of momentum behind me. But then I started going out to not necessarily Adelaide, but the surrounding tracks to ride track work. And I kicked up again and I started getting lots of winners again. It was kicking off again. And then it all came crashing down.
Which we'll talk about in the next part.
Yeah.